See. Hello? All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining. More people than I thought would join, actually, at this time, so thank you very much. My name is Niklas. I'm a field sales representative at Canonical, and I cover, I work on the French market, and been at Canonical for about 5 years, working on, many projects, whether it's OpenStack, Kubernetes, database projects for many, many customers. And today, one of the main topics that comes up, especially today in Europe, is sovereignty, right? Sovereignty for the infrastructure, for the data, for the software that you're running, but also for the know-how. And obviously, as Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, we are strong advocates for open source, and I think everybody in the room is that, right? So the why is sovereignty important, and how can we achieve this, right? So today in the landscape, you have different types of sovereignty. You have the sovereignty on the infrastructure side, on the geopolitical side, and the main drivers are obviously like the cost implementations of this. So some of the important parts of sovereignty is that today, obviously, you can be you have the aspect of cost, right? So if you don't have the know-how, or if you don't own the IP of your software, you will be dependent on other software vendors that will be, sort of either taking advantage of that, or you will lose the data from, or you will not be in control of the infrastructure, right? So in Europe, we're seeing a lot of sovereignty mandates, especially from EU governments, whether it's France or other sovereign countries that want to be able to base their technology out of sovereign clouds, sovereign software, etc. And it's sort of being thrown out there, but at the end of the day, where are they hosting their clouds today? It's mostly on large hyperscalers, right? And today, or for a long time, it was we moved to cloud, we moved the VMs to the cloud. Today, we're seeing that these clouds are not sovereign. The data is, can be fetched by other foreign political parties, etc. So the idea behind the sovereignty is that you have to be able to own your infrastructure, host your infrastructure, have the know-how on how to deploy this. And obviously, open source is a good answer, because you can get access to to the state-of-the-art technology, but for a fraction of the price. And also, you will be able to deploy it yourself, and obviously add the different integrations that you need into it. So, for the different challenges for the sovereignty is that you have the data sovereignty, the operational sovereignty, because if you don't know how to actually deploy the infrastructure, you're not going to be able to to scale that at a sort of state level, right? And then you have the software. So who owns the code, the project, etc. Are you dependent to any specific vendor? Basically by 2028, we'll have 68% of governments worldwide that will be introducing some technological, sovereign mandates and requirement to improve independence from different types of projects. This can be from, owning the cloud, owning the data, the different vendors that you're using, essentially. So, and 70% of the world runs open source, so open source software is everywhere, whether it's from the OS or on an application layer or anything like that. But we're seeing more and more interest within using open source in the enterprise, and this is something that potentially could be difficult for some, because today they either lack the knowledge or don't have the capabilities to implement that especially like at a government level, right? So why do enterprises actually choose open source? So obviously there's one key factor is that you can reduce your price, you can reduce the total cost of ownership for your actual infrastructure. And then there's the development side, so you can develop much quicker, you can use sort of state-of-the-art technology, use upstream projects, you can develop on new community projects, etc. So it also creates more sort of faster technology. You can ship your technology faster, and we can see this, for example, like a typical example of this in the last few years is DeepSeek, for example. You can see the quickness at which they can deploy an infrastructure based on open source. So the role of open source in sovereign clouds today is the transparency, obviously, because the actual source code is open, right? You'll be independent from any specific vendor. So from our perspective, Canonical, everything that we do is free of any license, right? So we can help you get started with the actual infrastructure implementation, etc., running your own OpenStacks, your own Kubernetes, your own databases. But in the end of the day, you're actually owning that infrastructure, because if you have the know-how, you don't need Canonical to actually maintain it or support it. Obviously, we can help you, but the idea is that we want you to be able to consume open source in the right way with the right tools, and eventually design and migrate your own workloads on a sort of sovereign piece of software instead of being attached to any form of specific vendor or having to continuously be dependent on any specific license that you have to keep, right? And so the how, we can tailor those to your needs. Obviously, today you have the hardware part and the software, but there's a lot of layers in between that. That can be sovereign and that can be based on open source. Especially today, we're seeing that more and more enterprise companies are trying to migrate towards open source, especially on the private cloud layer. And this is, but it's proven to be difficult, but it's also something that is developing more and more, right? So you have the operating system, level, obviously the virtualization, the networking, the storage, so sort of the main components for your cloud. Then the container orchestration, etc., etc. So this is where Canonical is really heavily investing their activities in, where from the hardware automation base all the way to the application layer, right? And all of this can be built on top of open source. And so, for example, for those of you that might be using Ubuntu or that might be using some of Canonical's solutions, or even just the open source kind of vanilla versions of these infrastructure bits, you can deploy everything from the ground up. So if you're using MAS for your bare metal automation, all the way to your OpenStacks, your Ceph, etc. So the idea today is that on open source, you are able to deploy private cloud infrastructure as a service that enables you to deploy, to offer these services independent from any vendor, independent from any type of, licensed software piece that you absolutely would need within this infrastructure. And that's the idea, that today you can deploy your own private clouds that you can run on sovereign pieces of hardware or sovereign pieces of technology, and learn how to deploy it yourself, right? So this is the main component of the sovereignty, is that if you have the know-how on how to deploy your private clouds, how to deploy your infrastructure as a services, your databases as a service, your MLOps as a service, etc., at the end of the day, you will have you will have a much better positioning than any other either company or enterprise, right? Because today we all know that 80% of companies are running some type of Microsoft license. Today we're seeing in France, like this issue with Windows 10, for example, is ending their support, and now a lot of administrations are looking into open source software. So there's some amazing tools out there, and today we're seeing more and more companies are using these tools by default, right? So either if you need a database, they'll be looking at Postgres, MySQL, etc. And if you need a cloud, obviously OpenStack will be your cloud of choice. So this is sort of where Canonical comes in as well, is that we have a kind of our opinionated way of doing things, but at the same time, we want to be able to enable you to use these technologies in a seamless way. So Canonical applies their own tooling and their own framework to these open source projects, even though we obviously use the upstream and the latest sort of versions of these projects. We will deploy them with their own framework. This would enable you to allow more automation, both on the hardware components, but also on the deployments of the clouds, and then on the operations of the clouds. And we apply this to every single piece of open source that we actually distribute. So that's why from the OS layer and even from the bare metal automation all the way to the application, you will be interacting with the same types of frameworks, the same types of tools, and that would give you sort of an ecosystem that would allow you to run your open source, but with the structure and with the same level of interaction with the tools, right? And then obviously this is something that is free for you to choose, and we do integrate with other types of implementation tools such as Terraform, Ansible, etc. But the idea is that through our partnerships, we can enable you to use any type of vendor. So there's no, we're sort of vendor agnostic in the sense of we don't care who you're working with, whether it's Dell, HP, etc. on top of Intel hardware, ARM hardware. Like there's no true difference for us. We just want to enable you to use open source, but in a secured and maintained way, right? So the idea, you're probably all familiar with the LTS versions of Ubuntu. You get 5 years of free security maintenance, and this we apply to every piece of the stack, right? Canonical is sort of the enterprise versions. You can get 10 years for that. So the real sort of enhancements is that we can enable you to use open source for a very long time and maintain the components for a very long time. These are sort of examples of people that have trusted us in the industry today, whether it's on the telco side, on the automotive side, financial industry, etc. Personally, one of my favorites, and because it's my customer, is the European Space Agency, so we're seeing that they're moving to open source software. The reason they need to move or want to move to open source software is obviously to reduce their vendor lock-in and not be dependent to, the largest, usually American companies out there. But it's also because they are running space missions, right? These space missions need to run for 15, 20 years sometimes, and open source for them is a way for them to reduce their footprint, especially in terms of IT spend, because it's going to ramp up, exponentially over the next few years, right? Especially for large databases, storage. They want to be able to analyze satellite images on top of these and hosting them on-prem and be able to archive those for years and years and years. And using open source is a great way to reduce that footprint. We have global partnerships, as I mentioned. So, whether you're working with public clouds, you can still run open source on public clouds. That's fine. Not as sovereign as you would want to be, but that's still, except if you're in the US, probably that's sovereign for you. But here in Europe, it wouldn't be, right? So. It really depends, but we're really trying to be as agnostic as possible and enable you to use open source on any type of hardware component or through any type of partner, right? So the idea today is that we are contributing to many different types of projects. Obviously, OpenStack today is the main project that we are promoting at this event, but we are present in many more different types of open source projects, right? And we're part of different foundations and working closely with many of these open source projects to be able to ship them to the public and also make them enterprise ready, right? Because the open source is amazing. We all work with it and we all contribute to it, but at the end of the day, enterprise users have to have some level of requirements, some support SLAs, etc. And those are things that can be more difficult if you don't have the know-how, if you don't actually know how to implement it the right way. and especially sometimes performance could be lacking. So those are the moments where you would need some level of guidance, or maybe some trusted partner that can enable you to get to that level, right? So this is the area where Canonical is sort of shining, and we want to be able to provide open source as much as possible and enable you to follow the right path in our humble opinion. So right. So as I mentioned, obviously Ubuntu is one of the widely mostly used Linux distributions. We have an incredible community. So even if you don't have Canonical as a company behind you, you will always have the Ubuntu ecosystem. From a customer perspective, Ubuntu is, you have no vendor lock-in because there's no license attached to Ubuntu. So anything that Canonical would help you do is to help you get started. But at the end of the day, whatever you're paying Canonical will not be an actual license. It will be either for your support, for your security enhancements, etc. But the essence of Canonical is really to be able to allow you to use open source, but in a safely and secure manner, right? And yeah, that was it. So I don't know if you any questions. All right. Thank you very much.